Her research spans folklore, cultural studies, Indian knowledge systems, and Byzantine studies. She has worked on postdoctoral projects under the Ministry of Education, focusing on the Bhagavatam and Bhagavad Gita, and currently leads a study on the Tiwa community of Assam for the NEZCC, Ministry of Culture. Dr. Bardoloi has received the Tata Fellowship, Dora Plus Fellowship, and represented India in Europe for the Global Encyclopedia of the Ramayana project, earning her the Bharat Vibhushan Award. She is presented internationally in Seoul, Jakarta, Colombo, and Nepal, and is a frequent speaker at institutions like IIT Mandi, CCRT, and Ayodhya Research Institute. With 27 papers, 3 books, and extensive editorial work, Dr. Bardoloi brings both scholarship and voice to India's living traditions. Her paper today is titled Mayang's Folk Traditions and the Colonial Gaze, Reclaiming Indigenous Knowledge in the Shadow of Superstition and Nationalism. Let's welcome Dr. Bardoloi all the way from Assam. Namaskar and very good afternoon. So, this research delves into the intersection of Indian knowledge systems and Mayang's folk tradition within the context of colonial encounters, exploring the impact of colonialism on the indigenous knowledge of the unique Assamese region. So, Mayang, long misunderstood through colonial stereotype as a land of black magic. This study aims to bridge the gap in IK's research by focusing on how Mayang's folk tradition were both misrepresented and later reclaimed in post-colonial discourse. This research will explore how these traditions were preserved, altered, and revitalized through colonial and post-colonial periods, with a particular focus on the tension between modernization and the desire to retain indigenous cultural practices. Through an interdisciplinary approach, this study will analyze the ways in which colonial perception shaped the image of Mayang or Mayang, but also how local resistance to these external forces lead to a reformation of indigenous knowledge. This research adds a new dimension to the fields of Indian knowledge systems, started by focusing on the localized experience of Mayang, offering insights into the ongoing reclamation of its cultural legacy and the role of folklore in modern India. So Mayang, a small yet historically significant region in Assam, has long been associated with mystical practices, folk healing, and esoteric rituals known as the land of black magic. Mayang's reputation has been shaped by oral tradition, colonial records, and contemporary discourse. While the region's cultural practices have often been sensationalization, and its indigenous knowledge systems encompasses a rich interplay of spiritual healing, medicinal practices, and folklore deeply rooted in Assamese tradition. Historically, Mayang functioned as a center for tantric practices, where local healers known as Bej or Ojha utilize a complex system of indigenous knowledge for healing, divination, and spiritual guidance. So consequently, much of Mayang's historical narratives has been shaped by external perspectives rather than indigenous voices. So Mayang's cultural and historical legacy is deeply intertwined with broader Indian epistemological traditions, particularly within tantric practices and folk healing methodologies. The British colonial administration, in its efforts to establish Western rationalist paradigms, actively sought to delegitimize local knowledge system. Colonial ethnographic records such as E.A. Gates' History of Assam in 1906 described Mayang as a place of occultism and superstition, reinforcing Western narratives that marginalize indigenous knowledge, and this dismissal of indigenous epistemologies lead to a decline in traditional healing system as colonial governance imposed Western medical and legal structures that restricted indigenous practices. So post-independence efforts to reclaim Mayang's indigenous traditions have emerged through scholarly research, cultural revival movements, and state-sponsored heritage initiatives. So the establishment of Mayang's Museum of Black Magic and the increased documentation of oral traditions by researchers such reflect an evolving discourse that seeks a reposition Mayang's folk tradition within the larger framework of Indian knowledge system. Margaret Lindo, a scholar from University of Tartu, Estonia, Europe, notes in her study on the Khasi belief system, indigenous traditions in northeastern India, including Mayang, operate within complex spiritual and social framework. These belief systems are often misunderstood when analyzed solely through Western epistemological lenses. Similarly, Mayang's traditions must be studied in their cultural and historical context, recognizing their role within INDICA rather than dismissing them as mere superstition. So the British colonial administration played a pivotal role in shaping dominant perception of Mayang tradition, similar to their approach to their indigenous tradition across India. British authorities regarded Mayang's spiritual and healing practices as superstition rather than structured knowledge system. So in 1947, when actually India got independence, there was a renewed interest in reclaiming indigenous knowledge system. So however, Mayang's tradition remained largely underexplored in academic discourse. So with this, actually we can say that despite renewed interest in indigenous traditions, Mayang knowledge system faced significant challenges in the modern era, and this include like loss of oral traditions. Like many traditional healers and practitioners have passed away without passing on their knowledge to younger generations. The oral nature of Mayang's folk tradition makes them particularly vulnerable to erasure. Scientific skepticism and misrepresentations, that is the second cause, because Mayang's healing practices herbal knowledge and ritualistic traditions continue to be dismissed as superstition rather than recognized as structured indigenous knowledge. So this mirrors broader trends in INDICA's research when non-codified knowledge systems struggle for legitimacy. Third, cultural appropriation and commercialization, and fourth is integration with modern INDICA's research. So this historical marginalization of Mayang's folk tradition, first through colonial narratives and later through post-colonial neglect, has contributed to a significant research gap in INDICA studies. And here, these are the research gap. You can see lack of scholarly documentation, colonial misrepresentation, post-colonial neglect, integration with contemporary knowledge system, and ethnographic research deficiency. So with these aims and objectives, and also this actually prepared these research questions, you can go through like how did colonial narratives shape the perceptions of Mayang's folk tradition, what were the consequences of this colonial misrepresentations of indigenous knowledge preservations, how have the people of Mayang resisted, adapted and reclaimed their folk tradition in the post-colonial era, what is the role of Mayang's folk traditions in the larger discourse on Indian knowledge systems, and how can modern scholarship contribute to the documentation and revival of these indigenous practices. And on these research questions, the scope of study, this methodology has been used, and most of the that ethnographical study. And these are the findings and research. It is most of the important of this research. This finding indicated that rather than being an isolated case of mystic folklore, Mayang represents a dynamic and evolving indigenous epistemology. The outcomes of the study reinforces the need to critically reassess colonial historiography, recognize the scientific and cultural depth of folk traditions, and integrate indigenous knowledge into mainstream academic and policy frameworks. By reclaiming Mayang's legacy, this research contributes to the ongoing efforts to preserve, validate, and adopt traditional knowledge in modern India. So these findings, you can see these three main points of results and discussion. So these findings suggest the colonial narratives played a crucial role in shaping external perception of Mayang, often in reducing its complex knowledge systems to mere superstition. However, these narratives fail to account for the lived experience and epistemological depth of indigenous practices. The findings of the research highlights the adaptability of indigenous traditions in response to external influences. The continued survival of Mayang's knowledge through both oral transmission and scholarly engagement exemplifies the resilience of indigenous epistemologies in the face of historical oppression. So here, these are some practices. Actually, during the preparation of this research, this is actually my new research on Mayang, then first research. So I just went to meet some healers, and see this lady actually sees divine poses, and during his divine poses, she tried to give the future prediction and made also one informant headmaster Lakhinder Hazarika. So according to informant Lakhinder Hazarika, Assam's tantric era began in the 8th, 9th centuries when the region was known as Pragjotishpur, a center for astrology and tantricism. Kamaikha Shaktipit, Kondoli, Goalpara, and along with this Mayang were key sites for tantric practices, because tantric was secluded locations like Mayang near Nilachal Hill, where Kamaikha temple is located, to perform sadhana using jantras. I'm using jantra, it's a term in Assamese term, it's yantra, sacred diagrams and mantras for esoteric knowledge. These mantras, primarily devoted to Lord Shiva and Goddess Parvati, were passed down orally and later documented in manuscripts. Here are the manuscripts. However, it is actually preserved in the Mayang's Rajaghar. Yes, there is actually one king is also there at Mayang, and also preserved the Mayang's first museum. So, however, colonial era suppression and post-colonial fears lead to the destruction of many such manuscripts. The British discouraged indigenous practices, replacing them with Western education and Christianity, while locals, fearing mispronunciation of mantras, burned them. For instance, Surabaya is actually known for catching tigers and using sacred mantras from the Yogini Tantra, and for a local this manuscript also, but burned unfortunately during his cremation. So traditional herbal medicine and esoteric healing in Assam, this is actually known as the Bhehos Vidya. So Mayang's healing tradition integrated Bhehos Vidya. There are actually for the two main points for actually use. Number one, mantra-based healing, and secondly, herb-based treatment. So Mayang's healing tradition integrates Bhehos Vidya with esoteric knowledge. Sacred texts like Yogini Tantra outline the properties of various herbs and their collection methods. For instance, like herb collection rituals. So there is a process of herb collection method. So it should be actually gathered at dawn. After purification rituals, while rectifying specific mantras, sacred sites such as temple groups, cremation grounds, and river banks are ideal for collecting potent herbs. Secondly, the collection, how they collect this kind of herbal medicine, herbs from the abandoned houses, termite-infested trees or polluted lands are not allowed, as they are considered ineffective. So remedies from Mayang's tantric healing traditions, according to the Lokendra Hajarika, that the informant that I made, and I got the information, and there actually he gave me 3 examples. Number 1, for a woman in labor. So a mixture of 9 pinches of salt and oil is applied to the forehead, while juice from the Katia Jara Tenga, here you can see it is actually elephant apple, we can call it O Tenga Katia Jara Tenga. In Assamese terminology, fruit and mixed with milk from a single colored cow. Cow milk should be actually single colored and is given for childbirth. For TB or tuberculosis, the tuber of the banana plant is boiled and mixed with long pepper, or we can call it jaluk. This mixture is consumed to stop coughing up blood. Third, for poison antidotes, the combination of raw turmeric, Katuri turmeric or jatuka, you can see the picture, it's actually henna. In Assamese it is called jatuka. So drumstick leaves and the hen's egg yolk is consumed. So this legacy of Mayang's healing practices, even in the 21st century, modern medicine coexists with these traditional healing practices. While scientific advancement have provided new treatments, many in Assam still seek Mayang's healers for ailments that mainstream medicine struggle to cure. So the integration of Phehos Vidya and mixed with the tantric traditions continues to shape Assam's cultural and medical heritage. So preserving an ancient knowledge system that blends nature, spirituality and mysticism. The Jogini Tantra is one of the most influential tantric texts associated with Assam's esoteric traditions, particularly those practiced in Mayang. It serves as a guide for both spiritual and medicinal applications of Tantra. So the people of Mayang have historically merged its teachings with Phehos Vidya, or you can say the traditional medicine, to develop a unique system of healing and occult practices. I have given 3 or 4 examples, and that actually was able to collect from this informant. The left side, the bottom, and the right side says Anumedhi. Yes, and these are the pictures of their ancestors. Actually, it is these pictures are preserved in the Raja house and also in the museum. So, yes, and these are the mantras are used, and it is actually informant Lokendra Hajarika, he collected from the manuscript, and he actually tried to compose. He was the first one. He actually composed in the vernacular language, and it is mentioned here in this book. You can see the middle one, the Borghat. It's actually souvenir. Here it mentioned about this Phehos Vidya. So these are the main points of this research, and we should work on this. So the study Mayang's folk tradition within the framework of Indian knowledge systems reveals the necessity of moving beyond the binary narrative, so superstition versus science. Mayang's indigenous knowledge should not only be reclaimed as cultural heritage, but actively reintegrated into contemporary academic and policy frameworks. So this process requires new interdisciplinary approaches, bringing together history, anthropology, ethnomedicine, and digital humanities to reassess the epistemological foundations of this tradition. Secondly, one innovation pathways for future research is the application of ethnopharmacology to Mayang's herbal healing practices. Many traditional remedies used by Bej or Ojha in the region have yet to be systematically studied within biomedical research, so presenting a significant opportunity for scientific validation and integration into alternative medicine. And it is mentioned, and one scholar mentioned in 2015 event, collaboration between indigenous practitioners and scientific institutions could lead to a new medicinal discoveries while ensuring ethical knowledge sharing mechanism that benefits local communities. Moreover, digital preservation is most important, such as interactive cultural archives and oral history projects, could serve as a long-term strategies for safeguarding Mayang's tradition. These digital tools can democratize access to indigenous narratives and ensure that knowledge systems remain dynamic rather than confined to museum exhibits or folklorization. Policy level interventions also most important thing because it holds great potential for sustaining and promoting Mayang's traditions. Integrating aspects of indigenous knowledge into formal education curricula can foster a more inclusive approach to history and science. Additionally, sustainable cultural tourism centered on Mayang legacy, if developed ethically, can provide economic benefits to local communities while preserving their knowledge system. Furthermore, the role of folklore in constructing regional and national identity deserves deeper exploration. The revival of Mayang's traditions demonstrates how folklore can function as a site of resistance and cultural resurgence. So, rather than being relegated to the margins, indigenous knowledge system can contribute meaningfully to India's intellectual and philosophical heritage, enriching discourse on alternative epistemologies and cultural sustainability. Because this is Indian knowledge system research, and that's why it is the future of ICAS research must be collaborative, interdisciplinary, and rooted in ethical engagement with indigenous communities, ensuring that knowledge reclamation is not just an act of historical justice, but a continuous process of innovation and intellectual growth. Thank you. Namaskar.
Thank you so much, Dr. Bardoloi.